In the first 10 seconds, you see a young woman standing perfectly still in the middle of Westbrook University's central quad, holding a paper coffee cup, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood down. Around her, red and gold Veterans Day banners snap in the cold November wind. She has dark hair pulled back, no makeup, and an expression that the 42 million people who would eventually watch this footage would each struggle to describe in exactly the same way. Not blank, not defiant. Somewhere precisely between the two, and somehow more unsettling than either. In the next 20 seconds, a tall young man in a Sigma Delta quarter-zip steps into her personal space and says, at full and deliberate volume, with a crowd of at least 60 people watching and a dozen phones already recording. You didn't serve. You're wearing that pin like some kind of stolen valor bullshit, and everybody here can see right through you. You're a lying BTCH, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Asterisk. The woman doesn't move, doesn't blink, takes a sip of her coffee. The crowd goes quiet. In the final 7 seconds, the young man laughs, a short, ugly sound, turns to his friends, and spreads his hands wide, like a performer taking his bow. The video would be seen by 42 million people in 72 hours. What the video doesn't show is what happened 4 days later. That part, you have to read. The event was called Westbrook Honors Its Heroes, which Maya Chin thought was a slightly aggressive name for what was essentially a folding table with a coffee urn and some donated cookies in the shape of American flags. She'd almost skipped it. She skipped most things. It was something her roommate Lena had pointed out exactly twice before learning not to point it out again. That Maya had a remarkable talent for being present in a room while simultaneously being somewhere entirely else. She went to class. She did the reading. She turned in papers on time. And occasionally, when a professor said something particularly wrong about counterinsurgency doctrine or asymmetric warfare, she would raise her hand and offer a single quiet correction that tended to leave the room somewhat unsettled without anyone being sure why. She had a 3.94 GPA. She had no social media presence. She had one friend, Lena, who she'd met during orientation when Lena had offered her half a granola bar in Maya. Operating on the social instincts of someone who'd once spent 11 days behind enemy lines surviving on 3 hours of sleep and whatever she could find in an abandoned farmhouse, had said yes without hesitation. She was 24 years old and looked 20. She was 5'4" and looked 5'2". She was, in every externally visible way, the most forgettable person on the Westbrook University campus. The service pin was the only thing that ever gave her away, and even that was subtle. A small silver eagle on her jacket lapel, the kind you'd see on any veteran, the kind that cost about $12 at the base exchange. She wore it the way she wore everything, without ceremony, without explanation. She'd come to the Veterans Day event because it was the kind of thing you did. Because somewhere in her chest, underneath the deliberate architecture of ordinariness she'd built around herself, there was something that responded to dates on a calendar the way old injuries responded to changes in weather. November 11th had weight. She acknowledged the weight. That was enough. She got her coffee. She stood near the outer edge of the crowd. She watched 2 ROTC students try to fold a flag with the focused terror of people who knew they were being graded. She was thinking about her political science paper, The Operational Ethics of Targeted Elimination in Non-State Conflict, when Tyler Hartwell found her. She knew who Tyler Hartwell was the way she knew the names and schedules of anyone who occupied her physical space with any regularity. Sigma Delta president, business major. His father had donated the new communications building. He had the specific confidence of someone who had never, in 21 years, experienced a consequence that couldn't be managed from above. He was with 4 of his fraternity brothers, all of them holding cups, all of them in the slightly elevated register of a group that has had 2 drinks before noon and is looking for something to make the afternoon interesting. Maya noticed them coming the way she always noticed things coming, not with alarm, but with the flat computational awareness of someone who had learned, at some cost, that awareness itself was the difference between walking out of a room and not. She turned slightly away, not in a way that looked deliberate, just enough. It didn't help. Hey, Tyler's voice carried. It was a voice practiced in large rooms. Hey, I'm talking to you. Maya turned. Yes. He was looking at her lapel. At the pin. You serve? The question had a tone already. A tone that said, I already know the answer, and it's funny. Yes, Maya said. Someone behind Tyler made a sound, half laugh, half something else. Tyler's eyes lit with the specific pleasure of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for. Where, he said. That's classified, she said. Which was true. The laugh from the group was immediate and appreciative. Classified. Tyler repeated the word to his friends as if it was a punchline. He turned back to her with a smile that had nothing friendly in it. That's what you're going with. Classified. It's not what I'm going with. It's accurate. Maya took a sip of her coffee. Is there something I can help you with? And here is where Tyler Hartwell made the decision that would define the rest of his semester. Yeah, actually. He stepped closer. Close enough that it was a statement. An invasion of personal space calibrated for the audience watching. You can help me by taking that pin off, because you didn't serve. You are what, 20? You've been in college since you were 18. I've seen you around. You're a junior. You didn't serve anywhere. You're wearing that pin like some kind of stolen valor bullshit, and everybody here can see right through you. The crowd had grown. It had the specific stillness of people watching an accident unfold in slow motion. The terrible window between when you see it coming and when it happens. Maya was very still. You're a lying B***TCH, Tyler said, loud and clear and performing for every phone in the quad. And you should be ashamed of yourself. In the silence that followed, you could hear the banners snapping in the wind. Maya looked at him for a long moment. His face was flushed with triumph. Behind him, Marcus Webb, a sophomore in the journalism program who'd been filming for the past 40 seconds, had gone quite pale. Okay, Maya said. She took another sip of her coffee. She turned and walked away. It was the calmness of it, the absolute, unperturbed, glacial calmness, that people would talk about afterward. Not anger, not tears, not even the tight-jawed dignity of someone holding themselves together by force of will. Just, okay, and then nothing. As if he were weather. As if he were a pothole she'd noted and stepped around. Tyler laughed, spread his hands for his audience, took his bow. Marcus Webb lowered his phone and looked at the screen for a long, quiet moment. Lena found out about the video at 11:15 that night, when her phone lit up with notifications from 3 separate group chats simultaneously. She stood in the hallway outside their dorm room and watched it. Watched it twice. Then she pushed open the door. Maya was at her desk, reading. She had a mug of tea, the specific Taiwanese oolong she ordered in bulk from a particular online supplier, because she had very precise preferences about certain small things and almost none about everything else. Maya, there's a video. I know. Lena sat on her bed. Are you? Fine. Maya, the older girl looked up. And Lena, who had been Maya's roommate for 8 months and had learned to read her the way you learned a language with no direct translation, saw something move briefly behind her eyes. Not hurt, exactly. Something older than hurt. Something that had been sitting with its own weight for long enough that it no longer needed to announce itself. I've been called worse, Maya said. By people with considerably more authority to do it. Lena opened her mouth and closed it again. Get some sleep, Maya said, and went back to her reading. What Lena didn't know, what essentially no one at Westbrook University knew, was that Maya Chun had enlisted in the United States Army at 18 years old, for months after finishing high school. She had done this not out of desperation or lack of options, but out of a very clear-eyed understanding of what she was and what she was capable of, and what kind of environment would develop that capacity rather than squander it. She'd been right about herself with the unsettling precision of someone who had been paying attention their entire life. She finished basic training in the top 3 of her cycle. She qualified expert with 3 different weapons platforms. She scored in the 98th percentile on the ASFOB and had been quietly approached, 8 months into her service, by a warrant officer who asked her, with the careful casualness of someone who'd rehearsed the question, whether she'd be interested in attending a screening assessment. She'd been interested. The screening assessment, which was not described in terms of what it was screening for, was 3 days of physical and psychological evaluation that washed out 63% of participants. Maya completed it and was offered a slot in an intelligence training pipeline that also had no official name in any documentation she ever encountered. She was 20 years old. What followed would not fit inside the ordinary language of a military career. It was more like a continuous immersion in a world that operated by different physics than the one most people inhabited. She learned to read patterns in human behavior the way some people read text, automatically, constantly, involuntarily. She learned languages. She spent time in places that did not appear in her official service record, because her official service record was a document maintained for administrative purposes and bore only a partial relationship to accuracy. She was deployed to Syria in the aftermath of a situation that would later appear in congressional hearing transcripts as a single redacted paragraph. She was in Afghanistan twice. The second deployment involved a three-person intelligence operation that resulted in the disruption of a supply network that analysts estimated had been responsible for at least 40 coalition deaths over 23 months. For actions taken during this operation, she received a commendation that required sign-off from a congressional subcommittee and was immediately classified at a level that prohibited public acknowledgement without specific authorization. She was 22 years old. The injury happened 6 months later, described in documentation as a training exercise incident, which was the phrase they used when the word operational would create records that were inconvenient. A hairline fracture in her left knee compounded by soft tissue damage that the field surgeon described as impressive, in a tone that suggested he found it considerably more alarming than impressive. After 3 months of recovery, she was assessed as fit for limited duty, but not for the specific operational demands of her role. She was offered a desk. She thought about it for 2 weeks and filed for medical discharge. She was 23 years old. She applied to Westbrook with a GPA transcript from a community college she'd attended during her recovery and a personal essay that was straightforwardly excellent in the manner of someone who had seen enough of the world to know what was actually worth writing about. She enrolled on the GI Bill plus a merit scholarship. She chose political science because it seemed like a logical framework for understanding what she had already done, the way taking anatomy class might seem logical for someone who had already performed surgery. She didn't talk about any of this. Not because she was ashamed or modest or traumatized, though she was, in certain specific and precisely managed ways. She didn't talk about it because most of it was still classified, because the parts that weren't classified didn't translate well into civilian conversation, and because the fundamental reality of her service was that it had never been about being seen. The pin was on her jacket because it was Veterans Day, and she was a veteran. That was the complete statement. No more, no less. She finished her tea, turned off her desk lamp, went to sleep. By morning, the video had 4 million views. By noon, 12. Tyler had retweeted it himself at midnight with the caption, "Some people shouldn't cosplay veterans LOL." By 10 a.m. he had deleted the tweet, but not before it had been screenshotted and redistributed by approximately 37,000 people with the specific communal energy of an internet crowd that has identified a target and is deciding, collectively, how interested it is in what comes next. The campus fractured, as campuses do, with the speed and passionate investment of people processing a conflict they are not personally involved in. There were students who defended Tyler. He was just calling it like he saw it. Stolen valor was a legitimate issue. She hadn't denied it in a way that seemed convincing. There were students who were furious on Maya's behalf with an intensity that suggested the video had activated something in them beyond the immediate situation. And there were people most interested in the phenomenology of her non-reaction, the coffee sip, the okay, the walk, which they analyzed with the thoroughness of scholars encountering a primary text. Professor David Walsh, who taught American military history and modern political theory, and who had served in Vietnam as a 20-year-old infantryman and had thought about that service every single day for 54 years, watched the video in his office with the door closed. He watched it twice. He sat quietly for a long time. Maya came to his 10 a.m. lecture. She sat in the third row. Unusual, she normally chose the back, with her notebook open, looking like someone who had gotten adequate sleep and was prepared to take notes. She did not look like someone who had spent the night at the center of a viral incident. She looked like exactly what she was, a student who had reading to do and wasn't going to let anything interfere with doing it. Walsh taught the full lecture. He didn't address the video. After class, Miss Chun. A moment. The other students filed out with the alert, sideways glancing awareness of people who sense that something significant is about to be said and want to be present for it, but can't justify staying. Maya waited. When the room was empty, she walked to the front. Walsh looked at her for a moment with the look of a man who has spent his life learning to read what people carry beneath what they show. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "The video is fine. It'll pass." "Maya," he said her name carefully. The things he said were factually incorrect, she said, without heat. But I understand why he believed them. I can't explain why they're incorrect, which I recognize makes the public perception problem worse. But I'm not particularly invested in public perception. Walsh studied her the way he studied primary sources, looking for the thing that wasn't visible on the surface. Is there anything I can do? He said. She considered it with genuine focus. Keep teaching the course, she said. It's a good course. She left. Walsh sat at his desk for 10 minutes, then picked up his phone and called his nephew, who was a colonel in the Pentagon. He didn't have a precise reason. It was the kind of call that felt necessary without being logically explicable. The call you make when you have the feeling that something requires the attention of someone with the right kind of authority. Elsewhere on campus, in the office of Dean of Students Patricia Cole, a meeting was taking place between Dr. Cole, the university's legal counsel, and Richard Hartwell, who had donated enough money to Westbrook over 15 years to have his name on a building and his son's disciplinary history reviewed with considerable institutional flexibility. This is a social media situation, Richard Hartwell said. He had the ability to make facts sound like suggestions. It doesn't need to become a university situation. The incident occurred on university property during a university-organized event, legal counsel said. Tyler acted in good faith. He was concerned about an integrity issue. The university should be supporting students who take initiative too. He called a fellow student a deeply derogatory name, Dr. Cole said, in front of a crowd, on camera. Richard Hartwell's expression shifted by approximately 3 degrees, enough to communicate recalibration without conceding ground. I'd like to speak with the young woman directly. Chen, is it? I'm sure we can reach something mutually. We'll need to speak with Miss Chen first, Dr. Cole said. Separately, the meeting concluded without resolution. Richard Hartwell made 3 calls from the parking lot. 412 miles from Westbrook University. At Fort Hargrove, Brigadier General Robert Caldwell was eating a sandwich at his desk when his aide knocked. Sir, there's something you should see. Captain Ellis had served as the general's aide for 6 years and possessed a calibrated, precise understanding of what actually required the general's direct attention versus what was adequately handled at his level. He only knocked during working meals for the former category. Caldwell watched the 47-second video. Then he watched it again. He set down his sandwich. Give me Colonel Whitfield, he said. His voice was the same as always, measured, unhurried, with the quality of a man who had learned that most problems were best approached without adding emotional fuel. But Ellis, who knew the general's frequencies, heard something underneath the surface register, something low and steady and very old. Yes, sir. And give me the contact information for Westbrook University. Yes, sir. And a pause. He watched the video a 3rd time. The girl in the gray hoodie. The paper cup. That stillness. Not the stillness of someone holding herself together, but the stillness of someone who genuinely did not need to. Give me Sergeant Major Torres. Ellis left. Caldwell sat for a moment with the video paused on his phone, stopped on the frame where Maya Chun was lifting the coffee cup to her mouth. He had met Maya Chun exactly twice. The first time was at her commendation ceremony. A room with 7 people, no press, documentation filed in the kind of archive that required specific security clearance to access. She had been 22. She had shaken his hand with the directness of someone twice her age and said thank you, sir, in a way that made it clear she was acknowledging the formality rather than performing gratitude. The second time was during her separation processing. He had asked her if she was certain about leaving. She had said yes. He had told her, with a candor that was slightly outside protocol, that she was one of the finest operational intelligence personnel he had encountered in 32 years of service. She had said, I appreciate that, sir, which was not the same as thank you and meant something more specific. He thought of her as someone who existed at a frequency most people couldn't quite hear, not because she was trying to be opaque, but because she simply operated at a different register of reality. He watched a 21-year-old fraternity president lean into her face and call her a lying *TCH. He watched her take a sip of coffee. He picked up his phone and began dialing. Sergeant Major Diana Torres was boarding a connecting flight in Charlotte when the call came through. She had seen the video 6 hours earlier, when it crossed her feed during a layover, and had sat with it for a long time, with the specific feeling she recognized as the feeling she got when someone in her proximity was doing something operationally incorrect. When there was a gap between what was happening and what should be happening, and the gap required correction. She answered on the first ring. "I've already got a ticket," she said, before Caldwell had spoken. A pause from the other end. "I know." Another beat. "I'm coming too." "Sir, you don't need to personally." Torres. The pause that followed was itself a communication. The specific silence of a senior officer who has already made a decision and is informing rather than consulting. She didn't have anyone in that quad. Torres looked out the small, oval window at the November sky, gray and flat over the tarmac. "No," she said quietly. She didn't. "She'll have someone this time." Torres picked up her bag. "Yes, sir," she said. Richard Hartwell found Maya in the library. She was at a corner table near the history stacks with her laptop open and 3 books arranged around it in the configuration of someone who had established a working system and didn't intend to be interrupted. She had earbuds in, not because she was listening to anything, but because they functioned as a social boundary marker that reduced the obligation to acknowledge people walking past. She had learned this trick from watching other students and had adopted it with the practical efficiency she applied to any useful tool. She saw him coming and removed one earbud. He sat across from her without asking. He was 52 and looked 48 and had the grooming of someone who invested in his appearance with the same methodical care he applied to financial instruments. "Miss Chun," he said. "I'm Richard Hartwell." "I know," she said. "Tyler's father." "I know." He placed his hands flat on the table in a gesture that was probably meant to read as openness. "I want to be direct with you." "That would be a change," Maya said, without inflection. His expression adjusted, not offended, but recalibrating. "I think we both understand that this situation has become larger than anyone intended. Tyler is young. He made an error in judgment." "I haven't done anything," Maya said. "There's nothing requiring your resolution. The university has not contacted me with any formal concern." She closed one of her books. "Is there something specific you'd like to say?" He reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table between them. "A gesture of goodwill," he said carefully. "To assist with tuition, books, living expenses, whatever is most useful. Along with a written acknowledgement from our family." Maya looked at the envelope. "No," she said. "Miss Chun." "No." She put the earbud back in. He sat for a moment with the expression of a man whose normal inputs are producing abnormal outputs. "There are other options available to me," he said, in a register that was not quite a threat, but was shaped like one. "Your scholarship has a review component, and I have some existing relationships with the committee." She removed the earbud again and looked at him. Just looked at him. Whatever he saw in her expression, and she was not doing anything dramatic, was not narrowing her eyes or setting her jaw. She was simply looking at him with the quality of attention she brought to things that required precise assessment. It was enough. He picked up the envelope. He stood. He straightened his jacket with the automatic gesture of a man restoring a composure he hadn't realized he'd lost. "Tyler was wrong," he said quietly at the door. It sounded as if the admission cost him something measurable. She had already put the earbud back in. The formal Veterans Day ceremony had been scheduled months before the incident. A proper event, with the university president and a guest speaker from the State Veterans Commission and a reception afterward with actual food. It was categorically different from the casual outdoor gathering where Tyler had confronted Maya, and in the 4 days since the video, it had become something considerably larger than its original design. Dr. Sarah Bennett had spent those 4 days in a sequence of conversations she would later describe to her deputy as the most clarifying professional experience of my tenure as president. She had spoken with the dean, with legal counsel, with the board chair whose calls had become simultaneously more frequent and more carefully worded, with journalists who had arrived on campus with the specific energy of people who understand they are present at the beginning of something, with Tyler Hartwell, who had oscillated between contrition and defensiveness in the shifting pattern of someone who has not yet decided which version of himself to commit to. She had not spoken with Maya Chun. Maya Chun had not responded to 3 emails and had, when approached near the science building by a university communications staff member, said, "I don't have anything to say about this," in a tone that made the staff member feel that the conversation was over, and continued walking at the same pace she had been walking, which did not change. The ceremony was held in Westbrook's main auditorium. 1,200 seats, 3 balconies, acoustics designed by someone who understood that some words needed to carry. On normal years, it drew perhaps 400 people. On this particular November 15th, for days after the video, it was standing room along the walls with folding chairs set up in both aisles. There were journalists in the media section. There were students who had not attended a campus event in 2 semesters, sitting in borrowed chairs with the focused attention of people who have come because something is going to happen and they do not want to have not been there. Maya sat in the 4th row, aisle seat, between Lena and Professor Walsh, who had found her in the lobby and taken the seat beside her with the composed determination of someone who has decided to occupy a piece of ground and is not going to be moved from it. Lena took her hand. Maya allowed this for approximately 30 seconds before gently withdrawing it, not unkindly. Lena put her own hands in her lap. Tyler Hartwell sat in the 7th row with his fraternity brothers. He had the look of someone managing his expression with visible effort, which itself was visible in the effort. Dr. Bennett opened with the expected remarks. The State Veterans Commission representative spoke about sacrifice in language that was well-intentioned and slightly insufficient. 2 ROTC students read names from a memorial list in voices that were young and serious and moved several of the older veterans in the audience in ways they didn't express outwardly, but that were there. 20 minutes into the program, there was a murmur near the back of the auditorium. Not a loud sound. The kind of sound a crowd makes when it notices something simultaneously, without coordination, the collective intake that happens when information enters a space all at once and people begin to process it in real time. Lena turned around. Then she grabbed Maya's arm with both hands. "Maya," she whispered. Her voice had done something. "Maya, there are." Maya had already turned. She had heard them before Lena had seen them, had heard the specific cadence of that particular kind of footstep, the weight and pace and unhurried certainty of it. The way a musician might hear the opening note of a piece they know before the sound reaches someone else's consciousness. For figures in full dress uniform, walking down the center aisle with the measured, deliberate pace of people who have nowhere else to be and are exactly where they intended to be. Brigadier General Robert Caldwell at the front, his dress uniform immaculate, his chest carrying 32 years of service in the silent language of ribbons and medals that most people in the auditorium could not read, but whose cumulative weight they could feel. Behind him, Colonel James Whitfield. And at Whitfield's side, a woman, compact and straight-spined, with a bearing like tensioned cable, whose sergeant major's insignia sat on a chest decorated with a record that told a full career in symbols most people in the room couldn't parse. Behind them, 2 more soldiers in formal dress, at the respectful distance of people who understand their role in a formation. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Dr. Bennett had stopped mid-sentence at the podium. General Caldwell walked down the center aisle of Westbrook University's main auditorium and turned into the 4th row. He stopped in front of Maya Chun. She was already standing. She hadn't decided to stand. Her body had stood, out of 30 months of trained reflex, the automatic response of someone who has internalized what this rank entering a space means, and she could feel Lena's sharp intake of breath beside her and Professor Walsh going very still. "Sir," Maya said. "Captain Chun," said General Caldwell. The auditorium held its breath. He said it quietly, though the auditorium's acoustics, designed for exactly this kind of stillness, carried it to every seat. "Captain Chun." Maya felt her own rank in the air like a frequency she hadn't heard in over a year. She felt her spine do something involuntary. She stood completely straight. "Sir," she said again. Caldwell looked at her. He was 58 years old and had the face of someone whose decades had left marks. And there was something in his expression that she hadn't seen during either of their previous 2 meetings, something she identified, after a moment, as controlled anger. Not directed at her. At a situation. At 47 seconds of footage he had watched 7 times on a phone screen in his office while his sandwich went uneaten. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Sir," she started. "Not from me, personally. An apology on behalf of," a pause, calibrating, "on behalf of everyone who should have been standing in that quad and wasn't." He turned slightly, and Sergeant Major Torres stepped forward, and Maya met Torres's eyes across 2 feet of carpeted aisle, and something moved between them that had no name in any language either of them had ever learned, but which both of them recognized. Then General Robert Caldwell did something that the 14 people who would appear on national television describing this moment over the following week would each describe slightly differently, because none of them had the context to fully understand what they were witnessing, only the visceral, cellular knowledge that it meant something enormous. He lowered himself to one knee. Not a theatrical gesture, not a performance designed for the cameras that were already recording. A deliberate, formal, considered act, the action of a man who had thought carefully about what action was appropriate, had weighed it against 32 years of understanding what actions meant and what they cost, and had chosen this one. Captain Mayat-chan, he said, from his knee, in a voice that carried to every corner of the auditorium, to every phone being held up, to every live stream that would later be watched by people who had no connection to Westbrook University or Fort Hargrove or any of the specific geography of this moment, but who would watch it because it was the kind of thing that required witnessing. I want to formally state, for this audience and for the record, that you served with a distinction that I am authorized to describe only partially, and not in full, because the nature of your service remains classified at a level that reflects not its obscurity, but its significance. He paused. The auditorium was absolutely silent. What I can tell you, what I can tell every person in this room, is that I have served in the United States Army for 32 years. I have served alongside people who have redefined what I believed was possible for a human being to endure, to accomplish, and to choose. And the officer standing before you is among the most exceptional intelligence operatives in the operational history of this Army. Somewhere in the 7th row, the sound of someone not breathing. You were called a liar, Caldwell continued. In public, before witnesses, on a day set aside specifically to honor the service of people like you. You were called a liar by someone who did not know you, who could not have known you, because the work you did was done in shadow, as all the most necessary work is done. Not because it was shameful, but because it was critical. Because the people who do this work understand that visibility is a liability, and they accept that liability's consequences, and they do the work anyway. He paused again. Something moved briefly across his face, a thing not often visible there. You were called a liar, and you responded with more composure and more dignity than I believe I would have managed in your position. You took a sip of your coffee, and you walked away. The faintest suggestion of something that was almost a smile. That is either the most remarkable self-discipline I have ever witnessed or a statement about how much your opinion of his opinion mattered. I suspect it was both. A soft sound moved through the crowd. Not laughter, something more complex than laughter. I am here because I should have been there, Caldwell said, returning to the plain register of a man making a factual statement. And because while I cannot give you back those 47 seconds, I can stand, or kneel, before this audience and say clearly, and without qualification, she served. She served with extraordinary honor. She served with courage that most people in this room will never be called upon to demonstrate. And she served at a personal cost that she has never once, in my presence, complained about or asked anyone to acknowledge. He rose. The movement was deliberate and unhurried. The movement of a man who had one more thing to say and intended to say it standing. Sergeant Major Torres. Torres stepped forward. She was carrying a small presentation case in gloved hands. With authorization granted 48 hours ago, Caldwell said, his voice carrying easily through the silence. And with the partial declassification of Captain Chen's operational record as approved by the Special Operations Command Review Board, I am authorized to formally acknowledge, in a public setting for the first time, the receipt of the Distinguished Service Cross. A sound moved through the auditorium. The veterans in the room, scattered through the seats, most of them identifiable only to each other, had gone still in a specific, particular way. The DSC, second only to the Medal of Honor in the Army's hierarchy of valor awards. The kind of citation that required not just command endorsement, but congressional review. Awarded for actions demonstrating extraordinary heroism while engaged with an armed enemy force, Caldwell continued. Actions which directly preserved the lives of Allied personnel and which significantly disrupted hostile operational capacity in a theater of active conflict, at personal risk that the award board described as, and I am reading directly from the citation, extraordinary even by the standards of extraordinary circumstances. Torres opened the case. Inside, on a bed of deep blue velvet, was a cross on a ribbon, white enamel and bronze, smaller than you might expect something this significant to be, carrying the specific gravity of objects that mean more than they look. She has been carrying this recognition, Caldwell said, without public acknowledgement, for 14 months. Maya looked at the case. She looked at Caldwell. She had the expression of someone processing an experience for which she had no pre-formatted response, and processing it with the same focused, unperturbed efficiency she applied to everything. And her face was doing something that was not crying but was adjacent to it, in the way a horizon is adjacent to the sky, present at the edge of the same thing, not crossing it. Sir, she said. Her voice was steady. This isn't necessary. He allowed the rare, slight smile to become visible. No, you're right. It isn't necessary. But it is right. And those are different things. He took the cross from Torres and pinned it to Maya's lapel. Precisely, carefully, the way you handle something that has weight beyond its physical weight. She stood straight through it. Completely straight. Beside her, Lena Park was making a sound she was trying very hard not to make, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes doing something she had given up trying to control. Professor Walsh had his fist against his lips. Around the auditorium, people who had no personal connection to any of this were sitting with expressions on their faces that told the story of something reaching them at a depth they hadn't anticipated being reached. One last thing, Caldwell said, addressing the auditorium directly now. I want to say something to everyone in this room. Not as a military officer, but as someone who has spent 32 years watching what service actually looks like from the inside. The room listened. Veterans don't owe you their story. They don't owe you documentation or proof or a version of themselves that fits what you expect a veteran to look like. They don't owe you access to the parts of themselves they gave to purposes larger than individual recognition. The nature of the most significant service is often that it cannot be described, and the people who performed it have accepted that invisibility as part of the cost. They owe you nothing. A pause waited with 32 years. You owe them the benefit of the doubt. At absolute minimum. He stepped back. The auditorium remained silent for exactly 2 seconds, the specific silence of a crowd that has absorbed something and is processing whether what they're feeling is real. And then it broke. Not in an explosion, but in a wave, beginning with the veterans scattered through the seats and expanding outward through every row, a sound that began as applause and became something larger and less precise, something that had no clean name, the sound of 1,200 people experiencing something they hadn't known they'd been waiting to experience. Maya Chun stood straight through all of it. In the 7th row, Tyler Hartwell was the color of old chalk. He was looking at Maya Chun with the expression of a person who has discovered that the hole they fell into was dug by their own hands, and it is considerably deeper than they understood when they were digging. What happened in the hours and days following the ceremony was the kind of thing that tends to occur when the internet, which had already invested considerable communal energy in a 47-second video, receives a follow-up event of significantly greater dramatic scale. Marcus Webb had borrowed the journalism department's broadcast equipment and a streaming account, and set up in the designated media section with the feeling of someone who suspects they are about to witness something they will spend years describing. The live stream reached 40,000 concurrent viewers by the time Caldwell finished speaking. The full ceremony footage had 4 million views by midnight and had been clipped, captioned, and redistributed in 17 languages by morning. The 47-second original was now being watched side by side with the 14-minute ceremony footage on millions of screens simultaneously, and the pairing had the quality of a before and after that people found viscerally, almost physically satisfying. The specific satisfaction of a narrative that delivers exactly what it promised, at exactly the right moment, with no wasted motion. Tyler Hartwell deleted his social media accounts at 11 p.m. on November 15th. He released a statement the following morning through his father's communications team. 3 careful paragraphs. The word humbled appearing twice. The word sorry appearing in a context that was technically present but structurally hedged. The statement was received by the internet in the way that carefully worded late statements tend to be received. He appeared outside Maya's dormitory at 7 a.m. on November 16th. Alone. No fraternity brothers, no communications team, no prepared language. Lena opened the door and regarded him with an expression that a professional mediator would have classified as hostile neutrality, pending evidence of good faith. Is she? Can I speak with her? He asked. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Wait here, she said, and closed the door. Maya appeared 2 minutes later in her gray hoodie and running shoes, holding a coffee cup. She looked at Tyler with the quality of attention that didn't presume anything in either direction, but didn't miss anything either. "Hi," Tyler said. His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard before. The performance register was absent. What was underneath it was younger than she'd expected. More ordinary. Closer to the actual age of 21. "Hi," Maya said. "I need to." He stopped. Ran a hand through his hair. Started again. "I want to apologize. Not a statement. Not something my dad's team wrote. Not. I want to actually say it." He looked at her directly. "I was wrong. I saw something I thought I could make into a joke for my friends, and I was cruel, and I was publicly cruel, and another stop. I didn't know. Obviously I didn't know. But it's not an excuse," Maya said. "No." His voice was steady. "It's not." She looked at him. He looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. Maya was quiet for a moment, holding her coffee cup, watching him with the evaluative quality that had once been professionally directed at significantly more consequential assessments. "I accept that," she said. He blinked. "You? Don't mistake that for absolution," she said. "What you did was a particular kind of ugly. Not because you were wrong about my service, but because you chose to perform cruelty for an audience, deliberately, on a day that had meaning. You knew the weight of what you were saying. You just thought you had the wrong target." She held his gaze without aggression. "Accepting your apology doesn't mean it didn't matter. It means I'm choosing not to carry it. I have other things to carry." He nodded. It was the nod of someone receiving a lesson from someone with the authority of experience rather than position, and absorbing it accordingly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She went back inside. Dr. Sarah Bennett issued a formal statement from the university that was considerably more direct and less hedged than anything that had come from the Hartwell family's communications apparatus. It included an explicit acknowledgement that the Campus Veterans Day event had failed to create an environment where veteran students felt supported and visible, a direct apology to Maya Chun by name, and a commitment to a revised and substantially expanded veteran student support program. The statement used the word "failed" once, in a sentence that contained no subordinate clauses to soften it. It was, by the standards of institutional communications, almost disarmingly honest. The deputy communications director told Dr. Bennett it was a significant liability risk. Dr. Bennett told the deputy communications director that she had watched a 24-year-old combat veteran stand in her auditorium and receive a Distinguished Service Cross with the composure of someone who had long since stopped needing recognition from people who hadn't earned the right to give it, and that she intended to be the kind of institution that deserved to be associated with someone like that, starting now. Professor Walsh sent Maya an email at 9 p.m. on November 16th. It was 3 sentences. "I have taught for 31 years before yesterday. I have been trying to find the right thing to say since the ceremony ended, and I don't believe there is one. Thank you for being in my class." She replied at 11 p.m. "Thank you for sitting next to me." General Caldwell returned to Fort Hargrove the morning after the ceremony. Before he left campus, he stopped by the library. She was at the corner table, the same books open in the same configuration, as if the preceding 24 hours had been a brief interruption in an ongoing project, and sat across from her. "How are you?" he said. "Still fine," she said, in a way that confirmed both words. "The citation will be fully public within 6 weeks. The review board has authorized a press release." She nodded. "Is there anything you need from the Army?" She thought about it genuinely, with the careful focus she applied to actual problems. "No," she said. "I think I have what I need." He studied her the way he studied operational reports, looking for what was present and what was absent, what was said and what was deliberately withheld. "You could have told them," he said. "At any point during those 4 days. You could have told that boy who you were. You had every right." "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" She looked at the space between her books. That specific quality of thought that wasn't performed and wasn't for an audience. Thinking as a private act. "Because what I did wasn't for his understanding," she said. "And making him understand it by deploying it as a weapon. Using my service to win an argument with a 21-year-old who wanted an audience." She shook her head. "That's not what it was for. That's not what any of it was for." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "I know that probably sounds." "No," he said. "It sounds like the only answer that actually makes sense." He stood. She stood, the automatic response, the reflex she'd never quite shed. He extended his hand, and they shook, and it was the handshake of two people who understood each other across a gap of rank and age and experience, which is a rarer thing than most people realize. He left. Sergeant Major Torres stopped in the doorway on her way out and looked at Maya with the look of a woman who has spent 20 years ensuring that the necessary work gets done by the right people, and who has not always gotten to watch those people receive what they were owed. "Chun," she said. "Torres," Maya said. "You doing okay?" Maya considered this the way she considered everything. Actually, rather than reflexively. "Honestly," she said. "Yeah." Torres nodded. Started to turn. Stopped. "Your paper," she said. "The counterinsurgency ethics one Walsh mentioned." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Send me a copy when it's done." Torres's expression didn't quite smile, but moved in that direction, close enough to count. "I might have notes." She was gone before Maya could reply. Maya sat back down, opened her laptop, got back to work. On November 17th, a Monday, Maya Chen woke at 5:30 a.m., ran 4 miles in the November cold through campus paths that were empty and gray and quiet, showered, made tea from the Taiwanese oolong she ordered in bulk from a specific supplier because she had very precise preferences about certain small things, packed her bag, and walked to her 8 a.m. lecture. She had her earbuds in. She had her coffee, the paper cup from the cart by the engineering building, the first cart open on campus, which she had identified in her first 2 weeks and patronized every weekday since, an act of operational efficiency that she had never consciously identified as routine, but which was. She walked with the same unhurried directness she always had, taking the same route she always took, in the same gray hoodie that had now appeared on screens in 12 countries. The campus was different. Not dramatically, not in a way visible to someone who hadn't known it before. But there were students who looked up when she passed, with the specific alertness of people who have recently revised their understanding of something. A few nodded. She nodded back. The Marine veteran from the campus veterans group, a man named Rodriguez, prosthetic left hand, economy of expression that she respected, fell into step beside her for 30 seconds near the library without saying anything. After the 30 seconds, he peeled off toward the engineering building. She continued toward the lecture hall. She sat in the back. She took her notes. After class, she went to the library, corner table, and worked on the operational ethics of targeted elimination in non-state conflict, which was due in 2 weeks, and which had, she now realized, the benefit of Torres's notes to look forward to, which was, she thought about this for a moment, actually quite useful. Torres had operational experience in precisely the theaters the paper addressed. The notes would probably be extremely good. The Distinguished Service Cross was pinned to the strap of her bag, where the small silver eagle had been. Most people who walked past her in the library that afternoon didn't notice it. Most people who walked past her in the library that afternoon didn't notice her. She was, in every externally visible way, the most forgettable person in the room. She was 24 years old. She had 3 semesters left. She had work to do.